All right, and we are live. Welcome to Base 10 Montessori. My name is Teresa, and today I am joined with two of my friends here to discuss some Montessori theory. And I see we already have 3 people watching. Go us! We did it! Wow,
Woo! Wow.
we're famous.
How do we see who's watching?
I don't know. I just see a little eye with the number 3 for live viewers. That's
Well, if
all
you're
I've got.
watching, put in the chat box who you are if you're watching.
Right. So if you are watching, don't forget to use that chat box so that we can see any comments. If anybody is out there and is listening to us, I'm going to check our mic status real quick before we get into anything. So let me know if my mic is too loud. And then what we'll do as we go along, I'll introduce each person. And then if their mic is too loud, just drop a comment in the chat and I'll try to see if I can adjust it. So before we get into intros, and I'm going to be a good host today and actually do intros. But before we do that, I just want to share our disclaimer for today because I want to make sure I play nice with YouTube rules. So let me find my disclaimer. Okay, so this show is all about using our Montessori training and our Montessori theory and expressing our viewpoints. So no medical advice, that means physical or psychological, and no legal advice. We love talking about Montessori, but this can't technically be considered advice. All discussions are based on Montessori theory and our training, and this is expressed as our opinion only. And all opinions expressed by guests are personal interpretations of Montessori theories, and it may not 100% represent the content creator's beliefs or values, and that's me, because we're all going to all be different and we're all going to have different thoughts and opinions. So we're going to respect that and allow everybody to have their own voice. And most importantly, since we're talking about children, since we're talking about families, if you or your child, if you're experiencing difficulties, please consult a licensed doctor or specialist. So we want to make sure that if you do need help, that you do seek somebody who is licensed to help you. So now that I've got the disclaimers out of the way, I am going to send it over. I think I'll do April since she's right next to me. So I'll have April. Are you good with that, April?
I'm fine with that.
All right. I'm going to let April introduce herself.
All right. My name is April Shanks. I live in Kentucky. Teresa and I met when she came to help out at the Montessori school where I've been working for 7 years. This is my 3rd year as a guide, but my 7th full year working at Montessori school. Be that as it may, I have been working with children since I was 12. So over half of my life, I'm an AMI trained guide from the St. Louis Training Center in birth to 3 years. And I have a 10-year-old daughter.
All right. And Leslie, it's your turn.
Hey guys, I'm Leslie and I live in Clemens, North Carolina. Teresa and I know each other because we went through training together at MISD, Montessori Institute of San Diego. So we both have our AMI diploma in 3 to 6. And I have been involved in Montessori for 13 years now, 11 as an assistant and now 2 as a lead. I was at a really big school pre-COVID. Then I switched to a smaller school this past year. I have a 14, almost 15-year-old daughter who went through the Children's House program at a Montessori school, and excited to be here and talk about Montessori.
All right. So there is our proper introductions that I didn't do last week. I just kind of put Leslie in and we just talked and you didn't know anything about her or why she was there. But we're getting better at this every time. So I think since last time we talked a lot about that multi-age classroom, we talked about that peer-to-peer assistance and the 3-year cycle. We talked a lot about primary, and we even talked a little bit more about the elementary age group. But toddlers and A to I, which is assistance to infancy, which is what April is trained in, that 0 to 3 age group, really is quite different and can work differently as a classroom in Montessori schools. And I know from experience, your classroom is not the full 3 years. So if you wanted to go ahead and explain what your classroom is all about and the 3-year cycle and the peer to peer learning that you do in your classroom and how that works, that would be great.
Yeah. So with with the toddler community or infant community or young children's community, it goes by many different names. Um, we do basically, you can start the children as soon as they are walking well, because we want the hands to be free to be able to carry works to tables. Um, they might crawl over to a shelf when they're in a nido, but we really want them to be able to use as much of that toddler energy as toddlers have, um, in a constructive way to use their minds and their bodies together towards a purpose. And so that's a lot of what we work on. And so that does mean that depending on how old the child is when they enter our community, they could be spending only a year and a half or 2 years, depending, on where they are, whether they're ready cognitively, emotionally, physically to move on to primary, because those are important considerations. Um, but within that, we are also developing their independence, their empathy. There's a lot of language building, and toileting is one of the main things that we work on in this age group. And we get beautiful friendships. They will see each other. Just this morning, um, I saw two children get out of their cars in front of the school, and they had both been in my class during that COVID year, and they're both now in primary, but they ran to each other and just like hugged each other with glee because they were so happy to see each other in the morning. So those friendships get formed in the ADI community and then continue into primary. Um, but then there's also a lot of peer-to-peer modeling, which is very important when it comes to toileting and that whole process, because as a non-parental adult, it's difficult to show a child this is how you use the toilet if you're not able to sit there with them, toilet and potty chair, which is how I trained, which is how I taught my child to use the toilet when she was 2, because we were home and we were available to do just that.
Right. Yeah. And so when you have this 3-year cycle in the last stream, we talked about how, the first 3 years of a 6-year plan, you have this creation phase followed by this consolidation phase. So you have these, and your training is very specific, because unlike elementary, that you're trained in all 6 years, primary and assistance to infancy, it's broken up. It's a 3-year training for your age group, and then it goes on to be a 3-year training for my age group. And together we make that first plane of development, that first 6 years. And so they're both really intense training in different ways to break down one plane into something so incredibly complex, because the rate at which your children, your age group, are developing so much happens between, like you were saying, that mobilization period and the period where they're going to change over to primary. Um, would you be able to give a little bit of an insight as to the child you see at, let's say, 12 to 18 months old versus the child that you're seeing going into who's ready for primary?
Hmm. Yeah. The child at 12 to 18 months, when they first enter our community, is nonverbal. They may have a few words, but they cannot express their needs, their wants, their emotions verbally. So we do a lot of sign language while we're talking with the children to show them, like, oh, are you hungry? Do you want to eat? Would you like some more water? Um, so that they understand, like, they start to learn those signs so that then before they have those words, because of the way that the brain develops, they sometimes it's difficult to get words out, but they have the signs. Because one of the things that we see in peer-to-peer conflict, even as children age, is, well, she pushed me. Well, what is that? That's emotion, that's action. That's the first, um, like in the reptilian brain, that hindbrain, that is the first impulse. And it takes a developed brain to be able to communicate with the words to say, you're too close to me. I need a little bit of space right now. So, um, in conjunction with that, we look at behavior, even though it's not socially acceptable, it's age appropriate, to see pushing, biting, sometimes um, hitting and crying. And we look at that as communication because they don't have those words. And so we do a lot of observation, um, which is, the foundation of Montessori, to be able to kind of infer and ask them, are you feeling hungry? Do you want the red cup or the blue cup? And then trying to give them the choices to be able to make, um, those decisions and have power, even if they aren't verbal. Um, and then the child who is ready to go to primary, they are independent with their toileting usually, or nearly so. They have words, they are able to express their wants and needs and concerns, and sometimes just the random thoughts that fled into their brains, um, very well. And you have conversations with them.
Yeah.
We had lemonade. We made lemonade in class a couple months back, because we needed the vitamin C. And one of the children said, when I drink lemonade at home, we get our lemonade from Raisin Cane's. And
There you go.
that's that right there. When I do this at home, that's another time and place than the present. And this is where we get it from. This is this thing that we do, and it's totally unprompted because we were just enjoying our snack and she had this comment.
Right. Yeah. Leslie, do you have any like particular questions or comments as far as like that 0 to 3 age group as well? Oh, you're on mute. Hold on. There you go. Is it unmuting? I think you're. I'm trying to unmute it. It's not working. Oh, I can't unmute it. Can you? Do you know how to unmute it? Do you have the 3 dots? Did you? Is it not working for you? Okay, I'll just have April keep talking, or we'll just talk back and forth, or maybe this is a good time to transition to the video as well, because you were talking about that neurological development, and the video that we were that I had found really talks about how Maria Montessori was ahead of her time. Like, she understood things about the way the body worked, the way a child developed. And we're just at the beginning of proving all of her intuitions true. And it's really amazing. And that neurological component, like when you're in that A to I classroom and you're giving all that language and everything, you're creating those neural pathways. Oh, let me add Leslie back.
There.
Oh, hold on. Whoa, hold on. Hold on.
There we go.
Don't you just
Technical
love
difficulties.
figuring it out? All right.
Is it better now?
I'm still getting an echo.
Are you still? Okay.
Hold on. I'm gonna mute it.
Shoot. Let me.
All right. We'll have her come back in. Okay. So anyways, so when you're giving all this language and you're doing a lot of this work in the toddler environment, which is very, very repetitious, even in the primary environment, repetition is like this big thing. Because again, we're really trying to build those neural pathways in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if Leslie's sound works. Are you there, Leslie?
Is that better?
Much.
Yay.
That's better.
Yay.
Okay.
That's much better. I mean,
Okay. Quick question. My mom said she didn't see. Well, two questions, but my mom said she couldn't see how to join in the comments.
Did you? Oh, does she? Okay. So here's the thing. If you're trying to get into the chat box on the live stream, you do have to have your YouTube account started, which is like anybody who has a Gmail account has a YouTube account. And so when you activate that YouTube account within your Gmail account, so when you go into your Gmail account and has that box of dots, you can go down to YouTube and you can activate it. So it might take a little bit of work. My mom had the same problem. She's like, I can't chat. I'm like, oh, I forgot to activate.
Have a Gmail account.
So the Gmail account, and then through the Gmail account, you activate your YouTube account, which then allows you to chat. But if she has questions and stuff, if she wants to text you or anything, and just and then you can always do it that way.
Yeah, I think she just kind of wanted to watch. Okay,
sorry. I know. Well, she can still watch it even if she can't participate in the chat box.
Okay, sorry. Refresh me what we were talking about before, because I did have a question.
Yeah, so we were talking about that 0 to 3, and I just wondered if you had any questions like for that 0 to 3 age group development, especially with that multi-age and peer-to-peer learning.
Well, what was the last thing April was saying?
I was talking about the differences in the child who enters the environment versus the child who is ready to leave the environment.
Yes. Okay. So
we have lots of questions as primary teachers about that, I think.
Yeah. My question is when do you think, okay, so first question is, a child who has been in toddler, when do you know that they're ready to enter Children's House? And or can a child who starts Montessori in Children's House, how can they succeed, if that makes sense? And like I had a classroom of 25 children, and in January 6 toddlers moved up at one time. So
that's difficult.
Okay, let me break it down. What do you think when you have a mid-year transition of toddlers who are 3, but maybe possibly not ready, and there's a group of them, like what do you suggest they do or need, or
give us anything you've got, April?
Yeah.
Good
Um,
question.
Last January, I had 3 toddlers start the same week, and it was so overwhelming. So I can't even imagine 6 coming into the environment. Now, hopefully you do have some well-established third years in your classrooms
I did.
that can help take a child under their wing
Mhm.
to like show them like this is what we do, because
Mhm.
that peer-to-peer modeling is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I would ask your administration, say, is there any way that we can space this out just a little bit? Because
I agree.
a lot of the time it's that like you dropped the goldfish into the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
and they're used to this and the parents actually have a bit of shock too from this. They have this very, very tight-knit community. They're in contact with the guide frequently. You know, I'm constantly like messaging with my parents just to say like, hey, this is how toileting went today, or we noticed this odd behavior pop up, you know. So it's a bit of a shock for the parents, but it's also a huge shock for the children, and then they have to reorient themselves to the space, even if it's a school where they've been.
Right.
It's a bigger classroom, there's more children, there's so much to see. I know when a toddler starts in the toddler environment, we get the shelf sweeping. They just want to touch everything. And they develop that impulse control throughout the toddler years, but it's, you know, it's still a new skill. And so sometimes those new skills, especially the last ones to be integrated into the body, are the first ones to go out the window when they're put under stress, which is a new environment. So they may have more toileting accidents, regression. They might have a little bit of language regression. They might be upset. I had one student who transitioned. He transitioned in January. He went to Miss Catherine's class, and all of a sudden he was afraid of the wind. We had a really, really windy day, and he was just terrified. And in my classroom, I go outside all the time, like unless it is like thundering or dangerously hot or dangerously cold, we are outside in those elements. And this child had never had an issue with the wind in my classroom. So they worked with the parents to bring him in a little bit earlier and pick him up just a little bit earlier, just within regular dismissal and arrival times, because this child was frequently later during that period, and it affected the rest of his day. So yeah, I would talk with administration, see if you could space them out just a little bit, even just like one a week, maybe.
I agree.
And depending on your state regulations that you may or may not be beholden to, a child may not be ready just because they are 3 years old.
Right.
I had a
they're
student,
potty trained, right?
Right.
Like, I feel like in old school, a lot of times it was like, oh, they're potty trained. They're ready for Children's House.
But sometimes even a child can be cognitively ready for Children's House, but not be entirely potty trained.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and that's another barrier to development, is those preconceived notions. So one of the things that I look for is how much pushback they give us, you know, in terms of their normalization, how they are from a day-to-day basis. Were they choosing work? Were they being a happy model for the younger children? Were they one of your solid citizens,
Right.
and then suddenly they're not.
Mm-hmm.
That's a major sign. Okay, this environment is no longer working for this child, and it's time to
Totally.
start thinking about transitioning them. And I had a student earlier this year. He had been with us for a year, and his parents are completely on board Montessori wise. At home, they read the book In Praise of Slow. They don't rush him at anything, and he was so normalized. And 3 months before his birthday, before his third birthday,
Yeah.
he stopped working. He
Oh.
puddled into the floor anytime we would ask him to do something, which normally he would be very compliant about.
Mm-hmm.
Just on the floor, no crying and tears, just
Yep.
I'm gonna lay here on the floor in defiance of what it is that you've asked, because this environment is no longer what I need.
Right.
And are you getting any communication from parents usually at that time? Are they seeing anything different, or is this pretty much isolated to your classroom?
It, in some ways, sometimes parents see changes, because it's like, if you, for instance, see an aunt or an uncle that frequently infantilize you, you're going to start pushing back.
Yeah.
So if they're still being treated like they're a toddler, then they might start saying, no, I can do this. And then the tantrums start because they're not being given the choice to do the things that they are able to do.
Right.
Or they'll start acting out because, sometimes every child's different, but sometimes a child might feel, well, I'm that confident child at Montessori, and I can do these things at home too.
Yeah.
But I gotta pick one place or another to be the baby.
Yep. I see that a lot when like children transition from toddler to children's house, and I'll talk to their toddler teachers, and I'm like, they're not choosing work, they're like running around the classroom, and they're like, they were not like that at all.
Yeah,
The
I've had that experience.
Like that's not who they were, So
too many choices.
So, yeah, too many choices, and maybe I'm like, well, they're just trying to find like their orientation and their spot in the classroom, and most of them always come around, but at first it's kind of like, hey, I gotta touch everything, I got and I gotta test the limits
and their exhaustion level too. Parents are not, when we do try to warn parents, to be honest, we're like, well, just so you know, expect exhaustion, and with exhaustion comes temper tantrums, and a lot of the times they hold it together in the classroom. Like, I'll tell a parent, I'm like, well, they behaved really well, but then when they get home, they let it all out, right? I've endured so much disorder today. I haven't processed. I don't have the order in my classroom anymore that I had in the previous classroom. And so it can be an emotional roller coaster for parents between those transitions. And, we're still in the first plane of development. We're not even talking about this transition going from primary to elementary, which is a whole different conversation. We are in the same plane of development, but it does go to show just how special the A to I training is, and just how unique that window is in a child's life. And also that transition too. And a lot of parents are figuring this out for the first time, and usually the toddler teachers or the A to I teachers are the ones that are dealing with this for the first time and guiding them through for the first time. And it's, you really have to be that sympathetic shoulder for parents through a lot of that.
It's more about the parents. And at my old school I was at, it was like we would transition toddlers in the middle of the year, like January. We would transition to toddlers, but elementary children, we wouldn't transition, which makes sense and stuff like that, And
I think that has a lot to do with just because that readiness in toddlers, you can't afford to wait 6 more months, right?
Right.
Like, if I told you, well, this child is ready, can you wait 8 more months until August? I mean,
Right.
as a A to I teacher, you'd be like, oh no,
Right.
that's no way.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
not going to survive 8 more months without that next
Right. Right.
change.
I prefer to get them young, like
Right,
2.5,
2.5.
so I can like train them up right. Like give them the expectations, like let them explore,
They can
but
adapt easier.
yeah,
Yeah.
like let them
I
know.
do too. I definitely prefer the younger students, although not all at the same time. Again,
Yeah.
I had 2 15-month-old children at the beginning of the school year, and they are more normalized, even though at the toddler level we don't really get normalized because their brains are still developing so very quickly. But they are more stable in the classroom than some of the older children who started after 2.
Right.
And
Right.
you start the habits and the routines, and these are the limitations before they reach that 18-month crisis of self-affirmation, where they start saying no to everything. No, 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 no. Even when
Right.
you give them choices, they're like, no. And I'm like,
No.
well, no is a choice too, but I have to choose this for you because you chose not to make a choice.
Yeah. What would you say to this, because this has happened to me in the past, what would you say to a toddler teacher who has a toddler who is
Is it an A to I trained teacher?
yes,
Or
yes,
yeah,
an I trained teacher who the child is age-wise because of the school they're at, not able to move to children's house yet, but this person is like, they're bored, they act out, like they need to be out of the toddler classroom, but because of their age in this past school,
Yeah.
they can't. Like, what would you say to
Oh, that's really a hard one, especially if they're ready, say like 3 or 4 months before they're able to move. Like
yeah,
you said, Teresa, 8 months. Can you wait 8 months? No, this child really can't.
right.
But I do have a tendency to start in, say, like April. We've got several children who I know are moving into the next subplane of development of the first plane, and I'll starting to play some sound games with them.
Okay.
I really work on the question game, start to have those in-depth conversations because they have thoughts and feelings and emotions and opinions, and they want to express them, and some children are more hesitant to express them, but others are not.
Yeah.
And so you just start, like, oh, hey, I noticed that you're wearing a green dinosaur shirt. What do you want to tell me about dinosaurs, And
Right.
some of them are going to be like, it's green.
And are they able to take on that leadership if you were to wait? Are they able to take on that leadership? Or are they kind of done at that phase? If you have a child that's more than ready to move to primary, they, like you were kind of saying before, they're not your model citizen anymore. So is it
Right.
more? It becomes more difficult. It sounds like, to count on them to do any leadership type work in a toddler classroom.
Yeah, it's kind of a coin toss. Like each day, each child is, a little bit different. So you might have one day they wake up and they come in and they're raring to go and they're working, and might take another child by the hand when they're crying and say, are you okay? Do you want an ice pack to feel better, etc. And then other days they come in and they're just not having it, and nothing anybody does is right. And that's usually when I say, you know what, things are pretty calm in the classroom right now. Would you like to take a walk with me? Let's go look at the primary classrooms.
Perfect.
And I might just walk down the hallway. We have 2 primary classrooms and they're on the same hallway. And I might just crouch down next to them and say, look at the children working.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love it when you guys do
I love that too. Do you encourage bringing primary materials into a toddler classroom?
I have been
Basic ones?
cautioned against that
Yeah.
by an AMI consultant, unless you are trained in primary.
Yeah.
Because unless you have had deep experience with the materials,
Yeah.
I don't know the desensitization process for the sandpaper letters.
Right.
So even though a child might be really interested in the letter sounds, I might just play games like if your name starts with Amelia,
Yeah.
you need to go wash your hands.
Yeah.
With them, just to start triggering some of that and piquing their interest in that, because I know that I Spy is one of the first games that frequently get played with children who go to visit in primary.
Yeah.
What do you think about sorry, I have a lot of questions. What do you,
That's fine.
What do you think about
this show? I should relabel it to Ask April
you're right.
all the questions.
What do you think about like having a toddler who is right on the cusp, like visiting a children's house classroom, like maybe once or twice a week?
I've never done it that way. I think it could be beneficial because it might give the child that sense of almost a duality. Like in the toddler community, I can be a leader like the third years are. And you might be able to give them like slight responsibilities.
Yeah.
To be able to carry out in the toddler community, whereas then they go to the primary, the children's house, and they're watching and they're learning and they're like, oh, this is the level, and this is the level in toddler community, but that doesn't mean that it's any less important, you know?
Yeah.
So it gives them something to aspire to.
Yeah. So what we did at my old school was the children who I knew were moving up to my classroom, like at the end of the year, which I don't know if I agreed with at the end of the year, but they would come and visit my classroom, like, twice a week to just like, get to know children, like orientation, like get a few lessons, things like that. But then I'm like, well, it's going to be a whole summer.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we sometimes move children up during summer program, which has its own issues, but you know.
I think overall that that worked really well this last summer. We had a summer program that was that was not strictly Montessori.
Right.
It was more Montessori-esque at a Montessori school. So
it
my
sounds like a great summer
ran,
program. I wonder who planned it all. No, just kidding. Sorry.
My classroom, that's okay. My classroom ran pretty much as a typical day would, except sometimes if it was beautiful and the energy was really, really high, I would be like, hey, you know what? We're going to take some materials and go out to the playground, and we're going to spend an hour and a half or 2 hours out on the playground, shaded, but and give them just a little bit of variety of things to do. And then we had some students who were moving up to primary. We knew that they would be continuing into the primary program at our school in the next school year, and we moved them up. And I feel like some of them, it really helped with that transition into the space, into the expectations.
The only difficulty I saw from my end was when we got up to like 40 kids, and those new ones, I'm like, okay, yeah, moving up into summer is great, but you know, when we have 40 in one classroom that's usually has 30, you know, and we have all these new people also working summer that don't know any of the children, don't even know the teachers, you know, and I think it's definitely a great idea. I think it does take execution and thought, because like we've discussed, toddlers also regress when they move into that new phase, when they do that transition. And of course, you know, you're going to have a lot more bathroom time, and sometimes that's hard to come by in a one bathroom classroom.
Well, and summer's so different than like the normal school year. You know what I mean? I feel like, and I also think that when you have a school, so the last school I was at was 18 months through 9th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if you had a child, you know, most of the children filtered from toddler to children's house. So they obviously like understood the process, like, you know, kind of got what it was. And so it's definitely number one harder still during the summer because summer's a little more lax, if you will.
It's a lot more lax.
Yeah. But
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just want to say toddler teachers are like my heroes. Like they really are, because like before I was a lead, and a while back I was an assistant and a sub, and I used to sub in toddler classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be like, woo, every time I go into toddler, I'm gonna break a sweat.
Yes.
Yes.
You know,
I worked in AMI toddler for a year, and that's when I decided I definitely want to get my training in primary and not in A to I. I'm like, I just can't physically keep up with this. And I know you've had plenty of being beat down and pain sometimes too. And it makes it impossible because it is a physical job. You are on the floor, you are up, you are down, you are all around. And like you said, and I can verify this, April goes out in all weather. Unless it's dangerous. That I will see those toddlers coming in. I'll be like, woo, we didn't go outside today. We chickened out.
I'm like, unless it's thundering, we outside.
Right.
We even take their water bottles out.
Yeah. The elementary will do indoor recess, but those toddlers, they're outside. True story.
Well, and toddlers are a whole nother group because, you know, once you get to the 3 to 6 age, like there's high expectations for that age. Not saying there's not for toddler, but there's high expectations, you know, and they're a little more independent. But with toddler, like it all starts in toddler for what they're going to be ready for in primary. If that is correct, April, I don't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And another thing that I feel is so very, very important. One of the reasons why I am like, hey, even if we can't go out to the playground and run around for a little bit, we're still going to like take a walk just around the school. Is in the classroom environment, we expect the children, you know, toddlers are not primary students, are not elementary students, but we do expect a certain level of decorum. We walk in the classroom. We don't use our outside voices. We're not jumping up and down and like skipping across the classroom. They need that movement, and I build movement purposefully into my classroom, so they have to walk all the way across the classroom to get water to the hand washing table and other materials, but they do need a time to let loose and just be children
and that might
relax.
Be a good point too, that in primary we have the 3-hour work cycle, and we expect the children to work uninterrupted for 3 hours, but I know in toddlers, you know, you're still working up to that. So about how long, or what's your ideal for that work cycle before they need to let loose for your age group?
Different days, different moon phases.
It
varies. Different combinations of children too. But usually we try to aim for about 2 hours in the classroom. So like if we start the morning at 8:15, by 10:15 they're ready to get out.
Mm-hmm.
Which does mean that, you know, and I've heard some differing opinions on this. Some people have said, oh, well, if you're asking them to go into, you know, go and do their toileting in preparation for having snacks so that they can get out by 10:30, etc., they can be transitioning between 10:15 and 10:30, that's not a full 2-hour work cycle. It's not uninterrupted. Well, their bodies are interrupting them anyway.
Exactly. You have to build up to it. You have to build up to the, even in Children's House, you can't just start with a 3-hour work cycle. You have to build up.
And with their bodies interrupting them, we do want them to listen to their bodies so that they can get in that rhythm and go, oh, you know, my bladder feels a little full. I feel like this before I have to urinate. And then they will put down their work and run over to the toileting area. So sometimes their work isn't interrupted. So we do try to, you know, like obviously protect that concentration, but sometimes their bodies distract it.
I'm going to take it back.
Disrupt it.
Thank y'all. Sorry.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Yeah, I think that, that there's a lot of debate over what the 3-hour work cycle is in primary and what's included in that and what's not included in that. Does it include group time? I'm very strict with my 3-hour work cycle. So I'm like, no, group time comes afterwards. But I know other primary teachers who do group time within the 3-hour work cycle. And so that's not something in training that they really pound into you with one way or the other. I think everybody just kind of, you know, the more you read deeply into Montessori and the more that you experience a classroom, you know, you come to what works for the environment you're in. And let's face it, we're not always in the ideal environments for teaching. We don't always have a normalized class. We don't always have a third year at all. You know, we don't always have that leadership class. And so, like you said, depends. Yeah. So do we want to try and do the video, or should we just do the chat? What do you think? The Judy Orion video?
We could do the Judy Orion. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe I'll put that up. Let me get that in the background for when, Leslie comes back. Let me do Chrome tab, because I learned if I don't do it through my Chrome tab, the sound doesn't work. Okay, so got that queued up. So this is about Montessori's, Maria Montessori's intuition. And is this the one that inspired you for your update today? Yes. So it does touch on intuition, but like you were saying before, that 3-period lesson, which I have videos about on the channel if people need to go into more depth on that. I think I spent over an hour talking about the history of the 3-period lesson. I just couldn't get enough of it. I went down a rabbit hole. So I do have that on my channel, but she does a really nice job of keeping it concise. So this is a great video for that too. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts before we actually play it about what you got out of this video?
I wish more parents would learn about the 3-period lesson, because many times they'll, with very, very young children, this is blue. Can you say blue? Like they skip that second period,
which is
entirely,
the longest period.
Which is the longest period, and then expect that child to jump to that third period and give the answer, and not only give the answer at all, but then also to say it with a child who may be very young and still working on their language skills. And I'm not saying all parents do this, and I'm, you know, of course I'm not in everybody's homes, so I can't see, you know, like what has been going on at home. But frequently, sometimes little snapshots say a lot.
Right. Yeah. Hey, Leslie, we were just queuing up the video and we were talking about how, we were just talking a little bit about that 3-period lesson. And April was saying, like, how she wished more parents would incorporate this, and how that second period usually, when you're not
Mhm.
trained with Montessori, that second period goes out the window and you just do this introduction of the language and then expectation of mastery, right? There's
Yes.
no, none of that, the association, which is very physical. And again, that physical experience is what builds the neural pathways too.
Yeah.
So I'll try to play it for like a couple minutes and then stop so we can reflect, and we'll see how far we go. We don't have to make it all the way through the video, but it's a good starting point anyway. So I'm going to press play. Let me know if you can't hear it.
When we think about the 100+ years of Montessori work, often we speak about what an intuitive physician she was, what an intuitive observer she became. We have used her intuition, but not really understanding where that is coming from. She practiced at a period of time when her main tool for diagnosis was observation. She had no neuroscience to back up what she was observing occurring in children. Today, we do have the neuroscience to back up a lot of what we do. I'm going to just use a couple of examples to illustrate this. In any level of Montessori work, in any level of child development, we know that it is critical for a child to repeat something over and over and over. How much repetition depends on the child, what they are interested in doing, and their developing skills. But we know now neurologically that as a child repeats the same activity over and over and over, it strengthens neurological firing patterns. So those firing patterns become memories, neurological, motorical memories. And those memories will not be set down if a child does something one time, just as they wouldn't for us. We create the same kinds of firing patterns by doing something over and over and over. Unfortunately, for adults, we have to repeat it many more times than a young child does. But that idea of repetition, which has been a part of our pedagogy forever, is now deeply supported by neuroscience. Another example that comes strongly to mind, and
I think that's a good place to stop for the second. So that repetition again, and observation. And that's a really key thing too. Like, she didn't have the neuroscience, the science that we have today. And I know a lot of people out there just saying, we're just figuring this out for the first time. A lot of doctors and scientists are saying that. And I think when you're trained in Montessori, you're like, oh no, she knew about this in the late 1800s. You're just rediscovering her work and not knowing that she already figured this out through observation. And that's something that really strikes me about just how brilliant she is, and understanding that 0 to 6 age group in a whole new way that other people have still totally miss in even in modern society. Anybody else have a thought on it?
Yeah, I just think it's amazing that she discovered all this. I was reading part of her biography. It was saying she was so intuitive that she didn't have the not that she didn't have the science, but she didn't have like the neuroscience. Like she just was intuitive and did observations and like recognized that repetition was needed to create memories. So
Right.
that's what was cool to me is like before her time, before advancements, like she already knew.
Right. And this would be interesting, when we have somebody with an elementary training, that repetition in the next plane of development, that second plane, not so important, right? Because it's a very different phase. And I know that you two have children who have grown up through Montessori, and you've seen things from the parent point of view. And then bringing it back to that Montessori point of view, you know, when you're in that 0 to 6, that repetition, well, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a child who can repeat something, right?
Yeah.
So, should I press play, or do you want to say anything else? Good. All right,
Let's
let's
keep
play
going.
for a couple more minutes.
I remember thinking about this a long time ago, very early in my practice, was the whole concept of what we know of as a 3-period lesson. We know that she took this idea from Edward Sagan, who developed the technique when working with children with severe challenges. And there was a difference in how she started and how it ended up being. Originally, she took Sagan's work as it was, when he would use 2 elements with these children with challenges. It later morphed into using 3 basic elements at a time, but contrasting elements. And why does that work? This 3-period lesson is a tool that we use to teach, primarily to teach words, so that children can store those words in long-term memory. We know it works. We've always known it works. But how does it work? And now neurologically, we know how it works. And there are 2 aspects, to me anyway, that neurologically point to why it works. One is a multisensory approach. So when children are using as many senses as they can use, experiencing and exploring a concept, an article, an object, then there are many more different areas of the brain that are firing to create those memories. The more areas, the more senses we use, the stronger the firing pattern. In this 3-period lesson, there's that introductory period where we just, for example, give a name. But then the second period is the longest period. And there's a reason why. Neurologically, there's a reason why. I also think that understanding and doing the second period comes down to the art and science of 3-period lessons. If you cannot do an effective second period, or if you rush it, or if you don't give each child enough experience with the objects, it doesn't work, right? So we know that along with this multi-sensory approach, we need the repetition, the time factor, which comes with the second period. And in the second period, the adult is giving the word. The child is making the corresponding attachment to the word, the object to the word, or the picture to the word. And that involves some movement, but there's a lot of repetition that has to go on. And the child has to have their hands on it. They have to manipulate the things and move them about. And every child has to be engaged. This lesson can be given to one child, or it can be given to a very small group of 2, 3, 4 children, because every child needs to have a possibility of manipulating the objects.
Okay. I think that's a really good point, because that sensorial aspect of the refinement of the senses is a sensitive period in that 0 to 6 age group. So when she talks about that sensorial experience, that manipulation, and that physical movement, that physical association with the material, that's a really, really big part of both ADI and primary training. So, and feel free to give your thoughts on that part too. But that sensorial exposure is really what's creating a lot of the neural pathways in the brain.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We do a lot of language lessons, and whether it's the replicas, an object with a matching card, an object with a different card, or just a language card by itself, the children have to develop a familiarity with it. And if it's just, we don't start with just the picture, because it's a flat, one-dimensional representation of, like, this is a car. Well, okay, what's a car? It's this picture, right? This is a car. But then, they take a ride in the car. Oh, you go in the car with mommy and daddy. You feel the motor vibrating. You hear the motor. You feel the acceleration and deceleration on you know, as part of your body. Um, you smell the car. Cars frequently have, different smells. You're experiencing with that with so many different senses that while in the toddler community we don't focus on the sensorial aspect
Mm-hmm.
of it, they're still experiencing it. It's just we're giving them car, this one thing that looks like this, that has four wheels, that carries people from place to place. This is a car.
Right.
Not in
And
so many words, but
right.
yeah.
And in the primary, it becomes more formal, and each sense in isolation, each part of the sense is isolated, and then you're going to refine that sense in the smallest component. And as a child refines it in the smallest component, let's say visual non-isolating, which is we're isolating one quality, either color or size or shape, something of that sort. We're just focusing on one thing, not putting color and size together. And then and then we'll bring all those qualities together and give them that sensorial experience and that refinement through our advanced materials of the visual non-isolating, such as the trinomial cube. And so what you're doing in your classroom is more of that informal, like this, the sensorial is there. And then when they get into primary, it becomes this very formal lesson. And in sensorial, we have language for everything, but we never give the language on the first lesson or even during the first presentation of the lesson. It's only after they've worked with the material and then it gets language for everything. Because again, that sensorial experience in primary comes first, and then we'll give the language later. So I don't know, if there's anything from your theory along with that in toddler, but a lot of the things in toddler, it sounds like you give language for are things that are common to them already.
Yeah, if you even go farther back into, say, the Nido,
Mm-hmm.
you start with, you only give objects that they see but might not have the ability to touch, like
Okay.
the spoons that we use to dish out. This is a spoon. You want to see the spoon? Like, this is the spoon. You can touch it, you can feel it. They put it in their mouths because that's the primary way that they're experiencing the world as infants. And that gives them a lot of that sensorial feedback. It might be cold, it might be warm because it might have been in my hand for, a couple minutes. The different conductive properties of different materials tell us a lot. But so we start with things that are familiar. And that, again, also goes back to, I know you and I have talked about literature for young children, and keeping it fact-based and within their experience, which is why we don't do fairy tales and make-believe and pretend and, monsters and dragons and princesses and magic and, all of that until they're much, much older and into the second plane. Because they have no basis in reality for it.
Mm-hmm.
They need to have this, oh yes, this is a spoon. We use this every day. This is a car. We ride in a car. This is a bicycle. Some cultures are very, very bicycle driven. This is a bus. We use this for transportation. Cat, dog, ball,
Right.
different
And
types
it's
of balls.
not because Montessori discourages imagination. It's just that Montessori believed that in order to activate the imagination, for it to become purposeful, and I'm going to say imagination instead of fantasy. I've always thought of fantasy being non-purposeful imagination. You have creativity, but there isn't an outlet for it, so it becomes more of this wish, right? This unfulfilled wish. And Montessori was very focused on purposeful, And so what you want to do is what you're saying is build up their reality, build up their experiences so that when they get into that second plane, we've given them the sense of their world that they've constructed. And based on what the reality is, then they can take it and be purposeful with it, with their imagination, and they can do something with it. They can do work with it instead of just sitting and dreaming of something that they can't actually do.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're not capable of. We want to always give them the outlet of purposeful work through everything. And that's purposeful for your age group, is what they're coming into contact with. And it helps them make sense, and it gives them order and makes sense of their world in an age where it's very crazy that 0 to 3, 0 to 6, there's so much of just trying to make sense. They're put into the world, and then they have to figure it out.
Well, and that's even, in an ideal environment. We always say, that the brain, the mind, 0 to 3 is that absorbent sponge, the absorbent mind.
Mm-hmm.
It takes in everything. And under 3, there is no filter. There
Mm-hmm.
is no choice of, oh, well, I'm going to leave out the violence that I see going on the screen or even in the home. So even in ideal environments,
Mm-hmm.
when, you have a stable, caring, loving family who gives you a rich language environment, they have yes space for the child, there's still going to be some things that they're, as an infant, as a toddler, going, wait, what? How does that happen?
Yeah. How does the light go on and off, right? Like, these are things that the child has to make sense of at some point in time.
Like, the microwave. Hot food comes out of the microwave. What? That must be what food is. It comes out of the microwave. So, that's another one of the things that we focus on in the toddler community, is we start with food that is a whole food object,
mm-hmm.
like a whole apple, and we slice it, and then the child gets to work with it and prepare the food. And
Which
again, that goes back.
Yeah.
That goes back to that 3-period lesson. It's
mm-hmm.
so much sensorial exploration. They're touching it, they're smelling it, they're tasting it, they're looking at it. I'll sing all of those senses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're experiencing just in slicing the apple.
Right. And I mean, the food work is super important, but it even goes further than that, because, we are very holistic. Like, and I see you taking the toddlers into the kitchen. Now we have to wash our dishes, not just because
mm-hmm.
we have dishwashing in the classroom too, or ideally we want it in there. COVID was not friendly to us in this respect, but mm-hmm. you still would wheel that cart in with all the food on it, the dirty dishes with food still on them, and they have to experience, like, this is what we do, and that is a sensorial experience itself, is, I have these things that need to get taken care of, or where does the adult go when they go outside the room?
Right.
So
yeah. What are they doing when they say, I'm going to go, I'll be back?
Right. Exactly. All these things.
Do they pop into non-existence? Are they gone completely?
Right,
I don't
object
understand.
Permanence, right?
Yes.
Object permanence. That's something they have to work through. So, do you want to watch a couple more minutes of the Judy Orion video, or are we good? Yeah. Okay.
Couple more minutes.
Couple more minutes, and then I think we got to go to bed.
Yeah, I got to go get my child in.
Yeah. Oh yes, then definitely, for sure. Let's do a couple more minutes, and then we'll call it good.
Okay.
This second period needs to extend long enough to solidify those firing patterns, and thereby storing it in long-term memory. And then the third period, as you know, it comes when we ask the child, what do we call this? Or what's the name of this? Or do you remember what this is? So that the child now is able to give us back the name. And when a child touches the object or holds a picture and engages those senses, it brings up via these firing patterns, all the information they know about that object or that thing. At a 0 to 3 level with the 3-period lesson, we don't use the third period initially with children. Some children aren't verbal, but they can certainly point to objects. They may not be able to articulate the word yet, but they can recognize it and point to the object. And some children, if you put too much attention to them, they kind of recede back into themselves and become a little passive, and they don't want to bring it forward. But as children become more and more comfortable in their spoken language abilities, you'll hear the words come out. And certainly before they move into a casa environment, where they're going to encounter a third period, we would want to engage them in a third period. This.
Okay. I think that's probably good. I think that second, when she said sometimes, you only do that second period and you don't move on to the third. And I was thinking specifically, knowing some of your experiences too with children who speak other languages and not just nonverbal, but children who, there is that language barrier there. And I know you have a lot of experience with working through that as well. So I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that.
It's one of those
that
things,
might be too big. That might be too big before I go to bed.
Yeah, you always have to take into consideration, is this child a multilingual learner? Is this child, do they have a delay of any kind? So just asking, what is this color? What is this color? Sometimes children might not be able to answer that. And then they feel like they've done something wrong or they haven't met an expectation. And so instead of saying, what is this in my environment, I will say, this is and I give a space. If somebody is able to answer, they will. If nobody answers, I'll say, car. So that there's not an open expectation, but there's space for them to answer if they're able to. Even if it's a k, like they're trying to get it out, or they drop a syllable and it's an R.
And R is a difficult one.
Yeah.
Especially if they're coming from, let's say, Japan, right? That R sound is almost impossible.
Yeah.
But I get really impatient with my second period lessons, and I know this about myself. And so to settle into that second period is a challenge for me, I've noticed. Like, it's something I have to be very conscious of. And sometimes you're trying to rush through it because, the child is kind of ready for the next lesson, and, it's more of a formality, but you just want to make sure. But it's easy for me to rush through it. I don't know if it's one thing for you because you spend so much time with that second period, like really that's where you're at with the child, that it's just like second nature now.
It's easy to skip ahead of that second period, even if you're in that toddler mindset of like, I've got to slow down, I've got to give this plenty of time, because it mimight be the 5th time that you've given that language lesson today, and you're like, I'm sick of talking about the different types of shells. I just, oh man. But then you go, it's not about me. And you're like, calm down, breathe. Right. Yes, this is a scallop shell.
Right.
This is a moon shell. And you give, that second period, you may touch the moon snail shell. You may pass the moon snail shell to this other child and give them that opportunity to experience it, to touch it, to pass it, to make those choices, to participate. with the object, or just to watch and listen.
Yeah.
But they're still taking in everything, like I said, little sponges.
The sponge. And it's very important because, like you said, they can't discriminate of what they take in. And it's not just what's physically in their environment, but emotions. Like if we're coming in with a bad day, they absorb that. If they've had a bad morning with the parents, they've absorbed that. If their parents are going through something and not verbalizing it or not bringing it in to anybody else's world, it's just something they're holding on to, a belief, an attitude, anything like that, the child absorbs that too. They can't make sense of it, they can't label it, but they absorb that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting that Maria Montessori did all this because of observation. Her medical background, her scientific method really taught her the power of observation, and that's what we come back to. Everything kind of leads back to observation. Be patience in that observation. It starts with observation.
Yeah. And then, as you get to know the children in your environment, and the longer that you work with children of a certain age, the more you're able to say, I see this happening. And then you can say, this might be a possibility of a cause for behavior, or, toileting issues. Oh, they're holding their bowel movement. This is very common. This is one way that we can work around that. Or this is, sometimes children feel that they don't have power, so you need to give them more choices, and that will help. Cognitively, it affects the physiology. It's just weird how the body works. Two things that you wouldn't even think are connected.
Right.
And it's just,
and that's why we try not to have the solution first, right? We always try to have that blank scientific mind and then observe and then take an observation and be like, oh, now I have an idea based on my observation. But we don't go to the idea before the observation, or at least we try not to. Like that's not our goal. It's easy to get into old habits, but and we didn't even get into the other segment, but I think the neme is probably a whole big conversation in itself that is kind of hard to understand anyway. So I'll put that off to a different day, but I feel like we covered a lot of ground, and I'm really glad you could come on because we needed a 0 to 3 person to fill in some of the gaps in some of our thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I've been doing a lot of self-exploration recently, and I'm like, yeah, Montessori and children, it's definitely a special interest of mine. And so parents will say, oh, I'm so sorry to bother you on the weekend. And I'm like, oh no, I get a lot of enjoyment out of talking with the parents about how to help their child succeed, because then it also, it also feeds back into my experience in working with their child. Because if I'm helping the parents to set them up for success, then they're more likely to have success in both of the environments, the home and the community.
Right, which we see a lot of things that don't correlate between school and home, and bridging those gaps. It's really difficult sometimes, and one of the best things for parents to do is come in and observe. Once they observe the environment, they might be like, oh, that's a disconnect from how you're doing things there, that I'm doing things at home. And observation from the parent perspective really is important for them to come in and see what's happening in the school environment. And again, COVID kind of put us on a different track for a while, but I'm glad that we're kind of hopefully coming back to a place where parents can see what's going on inside the classroom. Montessori was meant to be transparent. It's meant to observe. It's meant to be observed. And that's where our community thrives. We never want to isolate parents from the experience.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
All right. Well, I am just going to do a couple more things at the very end, but you're welcome to hop off anytime you're ready. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I enjoyed it. So,
All right. Well, hopefully we'll have you on again sometime.
okay. All right.
All right. Thanks, April.
Thank you.
All right. So just to finish up here, because I didn't start with this, I just wanted to let you know that if you wanted to contact me, if you are a trained AMI professional and you want to have a discussion or come on one of the discussion panels, you can email me at base10montessori@gmail.com, and that's base10 with the number 10. Also, I have other places where you can find me. So if for some reason, if you're not somebody who likes to spend a lot of time on YouTube, if you prefer Rumble, I do have a Rumble channel, and you can find it at base 10. You can also write in base 10 Montessori, but the account is base 10. So it'll come up either way. That's just a little bit of a shorter way to find my channel on Rumble. I'm also on Locals, but I'm not under base 10. I am trying to change it, but on Locals, I'm at montessoriforeveryone.locals.com. And sometimes when I have a PDF or something I want to share with parents that they can do at home, my Locals channel will be the place that I upload those PDFs, or anything that I want to share with parents. I go through my Locals account to do that. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to like the video. And it always helps if you comment in the comment section, and also subscribe. We're trying to build this channel and make sure that we're getting lots of information out there, and not just my information, but perspectives from everybody in the Montessori world. So I hope that you had a great time listening to it. I know I had a really great time talking with people I love talking to. And so that works really well for me, but I hope you liked it. So like, share, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video or the next live stream. So I will see you next time.